In 2012, T-Mobile polled Brits about their favourite things about the country. The Big and Buddy came out on top, followed by roast dinners, tea, obviously, history, and the BBC. Then, at just a few places later at number 10, came Yorkshire puddings. Some believe that only a true Yorkshireman can make a proper Yorkshire pudding, whereas others believe that it should be one massive pudding cut into individual squares. Even the Royal Society of Chemists have prescribed the ideal measurements of the perfect pudding. And even worse, Americans seem to think that Yorkshire puddings are pancakes, so let's just forget all those rules for a minute. How about Yorkshire puddings that are lower in calories, vegetarian friendly, more nutritious, and still delicious? It sounds impossible, but I think I've done it. Over the past few weeks, I've made over 200 puddings trying to figure out the best recipe. I've experimented with the milk, the flour, the hydration, the fats. I've took advice from everyone, from the bloke down the local pub to Michelin star chefs. I've made tall puddings, short puddings, and whatever the hell this thing is. At any rate, standing atop this mountain of 200 Yorkshire puddings, I've got two recipes for you. I've got the traditional perfect Yorkshire pudding, and then I've got a slightly healthier, more nutritious version. So let's get into it. So before we have a look at the specific recipes, let's have a little look at the kind of general overview. Professionals and home cooks alike pretty much all follow the same process. First, you whisk up a batter of even parts egg, white flour, and milk. Then you take that batter and you've got to let it rest overnight in the fridge. As the batter rests overnight, the proteins and the starches break down. This process is going to happen anyway when you cook it, but it's giving it a sort of head start. And when you actually come to cook it, they'll be more tasty and crispier. As food writer J. Kenji Lopez Alt says, resting the dough is pretty much the single most important step you can take to improving your Yorkshire puddings. 3. The next day, while you preheat the oven, you take the batter out, let it come to room temperature, and you preheat the actual muffin tray inside the oven so that it's hot when you put the batter in. When the tray is relatively hot, you take it out and you put your fat into each of the slots, and then you put that back in the oven so that the fat is ripping hot when you add the batter. Finally, after about 10 minutes, you take the tray out, add the batter, and bake for 12 minutes until the puddings are crispy, brown, and tall. And that's all there is to it. 5 easy steps. So let's put them into practice with the first batch of regular traditional Yorkshire puddings. So to make a batter, we're going to weigh out 2 large eggs. That'll be about 120 grams. Oh, Jesus. Can't even crack an egg. Now for these traditional Yorkshire puddings, we want equal volumes of flour, milk, and egg. So if there's 120 grams of egg, weigh out 120 grams of white flour. But if you've only got 100 grams of egg, you can either weigh out 100 grams of flour and have smaller puddings, or crack another egg and put a little bit of that in so that you've got about 120 grams. And then do the same for a half and half mixture of milk, ideally whole milk, and water. So that means if you've got 120 grams of egg, then you want 60 grams of milk and 60 grams of water. Add a big pinch of salt and whisk it all to combine. The next day when you're ready to devour some puddings, take the batter out of the fridge, let it come to room temperature, and preheat the oven to 230 degrees Celsius. That's about 450 Fahrenheit. Make sure the muffin tray is inside the oven as it's preheating. And yes, by the way, I've done the whole cooking show preparing them in advance thing with the batters here. What can I say? I'm a true professional. You might want to give the batter a quick re-whisk because I've found that it kind of separates a little bit overnight. Before we actually put the batter into the muffin tray, we need to grease it up with some fat. This part is essential. The fat helps the puddings rise and brown and also stops them from sticking to the pan. But the question is, which fat works best? Traditional recipes use this stuff, beef dripping. It's basically just rendered cow fat. It's delicious, but it's obviously not vegetarian friendly. A great British product. No. Seriously though, have you ever seen a more patriotic product in your life? Anyways, one vegetarian alternative is obviously vegetable oil. But the thing is, that'll result in less crispy puddings. As Lopez Alt explains, the higher the saturated fat content of an oil, the more effectively it'll crisp foods. So essentially, if we want crispy puddings, which I guess we do, we need to use a fat high in saturates. A good kind of rule of thumb for whether a fat is high in saturates is whether or not it's solid at room temperature, like beef dripping. Vegetable oil? No. But there is an alternative that's actually better than beef dripping, and that's ghee, or clarified butter. This stuff's so common in Indian cooking. I mean, butter in general is just fat, water, and protein. And ghee is just butter with the water and the proteins removed, leaving behind pure fat. And that's it. I mean, you can make this stuff easily at home if you want to. I've put a recipe for that in the description. But if you want to just buy it off the shelf like I have, go for it. So once the oven's preheated, measure half a teaspoon of ghee and put that into each slot in the muffin tray and let that muffin tray heat up in the oven for about 10 minutes. Don't worry about the ghee burning, by the way. It has a really high smoke point, unlike butter, because the water and the proteins have been removed. So even though it's going to smoke a little bit, it'll be completely fine. After 10 minutes are up, split the batter between the 12 slots in the muffin tray and bang it back in the oven. Let the puddings bake for about 12 minutes or until they're tall and crispy. Those taste unreal. The ghee adds a flavour that's kind of reminiscent of like a fish and chip shop or something. Obviously it's different from the traditional taste of the beef dripping, but to be honest I prefer it. Please forgive me, Royal Society of Chemists. Here's the nutritional breakdown for that, by the way. You've probably noticed a few ropey ingredients in there. In other words, foodstuffs that are delicious, but also dense in calories and not necessarily the most nutritious options. So how can we make our puddings healthier? Well, after dozens and dozens of experiments, I found the 4 best things to change. First, the flour. So swapping out 50% of the white flour for wholemeal or spelt flour reduces the overall calories and adds more fibre. The second thing to change is the milk. Swapping out whole milk for semi-skimmed milk reduces the calories and actually leads to taller puddings. The third thing to change is the hydration. So with the traditional recipe that we just ran through, we're using equal parts flour, milk and egg. That means that with the egg and the milk, we have a 200% hydration because 200% of the ingredients are liquid. But by reducing that flour content, it not only reduces the calories, but it makes the puddings taller. But if we want to reduce the calories, we can just lower the hydration by adding less flour. It not only reduces the calories, but it actually makes the puddings taller. So it's another win-win. So instead of that 200% base recipe hydration, we'll go for a hydration of 266%. In practice, that means for every 90 grams of flour, we add 120 grams of egg, 60 grams of water, and 60 grams of semi-skimmed milk. The fourth and final variable is the fat. The fat is the main source of calories in this bad lad, but by swapping out the ghee for one of these low-calorie cooking sprays, we almost cut down the calories by a third. Obviously this goes without saying, but this massively impacts the taste, the rise, and the crispiness. At any rate, let's put it all together. So, first let's make a batter. Crack open 2 eggs, about 120 grams. Then we add equal parts white flour and spelt or wholemeal flour relative to 3/4 of the egg's weight. So if you have 120 grams of egg, you're going to want 90 grams of flour. That's 45 grams wholemeal or spelt flour and 45 grams white flour. Then add 60 grams of semi-skimmed milk and 60 grams of water. Add a generous pinch of salt and whisk it up until combined. Again, you want to leave that batter in the fridge overnight. Next day, preheat the oven to 230°C, 450 Fahrenheit, with the muffin tray inside as the batter comes to room temperature. Yes, I prepared both batters in advance. Honestly, someone owes me a real cooking show. Once that's preheated, spray each muffin tray with about 5 calories of the low-calorie cooking spray and put it back in the oven for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, split the batter between the 12 slots. Spray each slot with 3 sprays of the cooking spray and put it back in the oven. You want to cook that for 14 minutes or until they're crispy and browned. Alexa, set a 14-minute timer.
14 minutes. 17 minutes.
When you think they're ready, which is probably about 40 minutes, take them out and let them rest. Oh shit. Do these taste as good as the traditional Yorkshire puddings? No, of course not. There's a reason we slather all our food in ghee, butter or oil. It just tastes good, it tastes better. If you want a lower calorie pudding, you've got to accept that the taste is going to change. It's comparable, it's decent, but it's not as good. I do think though, this is the closest you're going to get to the original. In future when I'm making them, what I'll do is reduce the hydration, swap out the milk, swap out the flours, but I'll be keeping the ghee. I think that fat is essential and the lower calorie cooking spray is just too tasteless for me. In any case, here's the nutrition with all the variables swapped out. So after making 200 Yorkshire puddings, I've got to admit, I'm absolutely sick to death of Yorkshire puddings. I don't think I'm going to be able to look at another one for a long time. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'm constantly cooking, experimenting and researching to learn more about food and cookery, and I share what I've learned every single week. If you want to learn more about the food that you cook and better ways to cook it, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you next time where we're going to learn about the best way to peel garlic.